On today's show, sloppy. That's how you describe the Cavs' performance in Oklahoma City. We're going to talk about it on a new episode of Locked On Cavs for Thursday, November 9th.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Check them out right now. New customers can get a bonus of $150 in bonus bets with any $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I'm Chris Manning, solo today. Evan is going to be away until sometime next week. That man is getting married this weekend, so you have just me for the rest of this week. Going to try to have a guest at the start of next week. But as always, we do have Jake Stevens, who I'm very excited for some things going on in his life. Good times. Things are up. Looking good here in the Locked On Cavs corner of the universe. Cavs Thunder, though, was not what I would describe as a good Cavs performance, not by any stretch of the imagination. Cleveland loses the first game of their 4-game road trip, 128-120. Certainly made a valiant push to get within 5 late in this game. Made efforts, got a good amount of carousel vert, but it wasn't enough. And I think the way to describe it is the word I used at the top of the show, and that is sloppy. This was not a Cavs performance that I think JB Bicker's staff and the coaching staff and the players are going to be happy with, because I think it felt like you know that this team is capable of more. You know that this team is better than this, I would say, right? I don't think if you're going to extrapolate this game and say this is what the Cavs are, I don't think that's right. This Cavs team should be better than this. Oklahoma City is good. This is not to take away from what Oklahoma City is, and they beat the Cavs twice this year, and fair play to them. You know, you play who's in front of you. They won in Cleveland. They won against a basically full-strength Cavs team in Oklahoma City. Shea was the best player on the floor at 43. All 5 of their starters in double figures. All of that is true. But I don't feel like this was a good Cavs performance by any stretch of the imagination. Poor shooting from 3. A lack of focus on the glass. Where have we seen that before? Couldn't get rebounds late. Certainly, I think Darius Garland is had a lot of the issues. It felt like in the first quarter in particular, he was turning the ball over just all over the place and making tons of sloppy mistakes and just not being the version of DG that I think brings the best out of this Cavs team. And that gets you a loss like this. You could probably get away on some nights with a performance like this against maybe the Wizards, who are really bad, or the Blazers, who we'll see soon, or this Kings team without De'Aaron Fox. There are teams that you can play poorly against, and because you have enough good players and you show them enough grit and you make enough key buckets, get stops, whatever it is, whatever the formula is on that night, you can sometimes get wins. That happens in the NBA season. The 82-game season is long. It goes up and down. It is never linear. So sometimes you're going to have ugly wins and you're going to pull them out. But there are teams that are good enough, and when they also play just good enough and they get a star performance like they got from Shea, you can't play like that and expect to win. You just can't. Especially coming off of the performance against Oklahoma City, I think this loss also does have to feel more disappointing if you're Cleveland. To me, the Oklahoma City game was the best game that they had played this season. They beat a really good Warriors team, a Warriors team that I think is in the title conversation in some way, that I think is better than I expected based on what we've seen so far, and I think with some room to grow even if Andrew Wiggins can play better and get back to closer to where he was a little bit ago and when they won the title. Right now, that win stands as kind of an anomaly amid what the Cavs are. That the performance you saw against the Warriors, even with some turnover issues from Garland and others in that game, was sharper. It was more. You were just better. You showed up more. Maybe it's a home thing, although the Cavs haven't been great at home this year. Maybe the Thunder just have advantages over you. I think there is something to that part of it. I think the Thunder show you with how big they are that the Cavs just, they have two bigs, but they're kind of a small team and not the bulkiest team in some ways, right? You're playing two small guards. Some of Garland's turnover issues were trying to, early in this game, pass over bigger defenders who had position on him, and he was forcing it, and that was just careless, and you're not going to win games like that. You look at the Thunder, and they have Jalen Williams, and they have Dort, and they have Giddey, and they have Shea, and they're just big everywhere, and then they throw in Case and Wallace, and all of their guys feel big. The Cavs don't feel that way. I think certainly that is a stylistic issue for Cleveland in games like this, and something that I think is a weakness in this roster. And if you're looking at upgrades and thinking about trades or whatever, finding size on the perimeter and size at the backup guard spot perhaps could be needed. I mean, this is a game that if he was around and at his best and all of that stuff, a lot of caveats, but this is a game where you could see the best version of Ricky Rubio having a positive impact. But that's a whole other conversation. You come off of that Warriors game, you come off of that win and getting everyone back, and you feel like, okay, is the ship getting back to normal? Is the ship getting righted? And I thought the first half in particular was one of the sloppiest, disorganized, whatever negative adjectives you want to use, performances we've seen from the Cavs this year. That isn't a great energy as you start this road trip. Is it the whole story? No. Is it something that is going to define the season? No. We're in November. This isn't a loss that will just explain everything away from you and tell you exactly what this team is. But is it a loss, and the kind of loss that I think is frustrating and you should expect more from the Cavs of? Absolutely. The Cavs should be a better team than having performances like this. You're going to have some of them sometimes, but I think coming off of that Warriors game, that they should expect to play at a higher standard than I think they did here. This was not a good Garland game. This is not a good Mitchell game. LeVert was really the best guy on the floor for this team. I think the other part of this that can't go ignored is that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just kind of cooked them all over the floor. Everywhere he wanted, with footwork, with shot selection, getting in the paint, getting to the free throw line. He got whatever he wanted. We'll talk about Isaac Okoro in segment 3, but you could have used him to at least throw a better body at Shai. And if you're looking at recipes of how to beat the Cavs, well, a big wing scorer who can attack them like this remains a weakness, and it's just going to be based on this roster that every team has weaknesses, and not every team has Shai or someone close to as good as Shai. But if you're looking at weaknesses within the Cavs, that's just going to be one of them. And look, maybe you weren't going to win this game anyway if Shai was going to do this. Maybe you played a perfect game and the comeback was more successful or something, and you still lose because of Shai. He's that good. This was that good a performance in a lot of ways from him. But you just don't do yourself any favors to get a win when you play a sloppy and just meh, as the Cavs were for much of this game. And I think as they go on this road trip, they get the Warriors on Saturday, they get the Kings and the Blazers next week. You would like to see a sharper version of the Cavs, but we'll see where we get. All right, coming up next, game awards. That's going to be MVP stat of the night and play of the night. We'll talk about those up next. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, which is one of my favorite sponsors because it's one of the most fun ways you can play daily fantasy sports. It is the easiest and really the most exciting way to do so. You pick more or less than different options they have on the app. For instance, you go LeBron, over on threes. You go Travis Kelce over on reception. You go Darius Garland over on assists and all of that stuff. And if you want to play against some of PrizePicks' favorite players, Meek Mill, comedian Andrew Schultz, just had UFC champion Sean O'Malley at an event down in Atlanta, you can now find these famous, awesome people under the community plan, under the promos tab on the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in their PrizePicks community every week. They also offer a reboot policy, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury assurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. It is the best way to play daily fantasy sports, and it's daily fantasy sports made easy. Again, use that code LOCKEDONNBA at PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100 on your first deposit. All right, back here. Game awards time here on Locked On Cavs. I'm Chris Manning from Fear the Sword, from the Just Basketball Show, from Dime, from Cleveland Magazine, a whole lot of places. All right, Thunder awards, Caris LeVert has to be the MVP here. Team high 29 points. Was a big part of how the Cavs showed some fight, showed some grit, and got this game at least somewhat close. LeVert remains just kind of a weird piece in this team to me, because I think what he does is kind of a funky fit with Garland and Mitchell at the most optimum version of this team. Like the best version of LeVert, it's hard to get that next to those two guys if they're on the floor at the same time. But there is a lot of value for him, I think, when you find him in the situation where those guys have an off night. You stagger the minutes some. You just need someone else to create. You don't have this backup point guard. Well, Caris LeVert can step in, and he's playing into that role really, really. Had 29. He took 16 free throws, got to the line really aggressively in a way that was a really big deal. By comparison, Garland just took 1 free throw after his monster free throw performance the other night. Mitchell only took 3. So LeVert was the one getting into the paint, attacking, putting pressure on the bigs. You love to see that from Caris. This is a good version of Caris. He was only 2-6 from 3, but had the 5 assists versus just 3 turnovers, got to the line a ton, and was a really big part of how they got back in this game. This game is not as close as it was down the stretch. It wouldn't have been within reach in a way that, frankly, it felt like it shouldn't have been, unless you got Caris LeVert being this kind of guy. And say what you want about him. I just said some stuff about how his fit isn't perfect, said how his fit isn't all the way there, and maybe, you could use his salary and think about him in that way if you really wanted to. But as someone who stepped in this game and often has attacked the rim, had some good assists, played outside of kind of what I think we've understood him as before this, you can't say enough about that and what he did. And he is the number one reason why Cleveland was in this game for a stretch down late and had a chance to sneak one out and steal one that they had no business stealing. So shout out to Caris LeVert for that. Stat of the night. I got 2 for you because they're kind of linked. Number 1, 9 assists versus 8 turnovers for Darius Garland. And Oklahoma City had 30 points off of Cleveland's turnovers in this game. Those 2 things as a recipe. Garland with 8 of Cleveland's 18 turnovers and the 30 points for Oklahoma City off Cleveland's turnovers. You're gonna you told me, if you told me going into a game that the Cavs were going to have those kind of turnover issues, I would say they're gonna lose. I would look at that and say they're not winning that basketball game. I don't see how they're winning that basketball game. Darius Garland is so integral to this team functioning at its best. And because of his decision-making, something we've praised, I think Evan and I have praised a lot here on the show, and I think rightfully so, for how good he can be as a decision-maker. That didn't show up here, and on the nights where that doesn't happen, it's very hard for the Cavs to win. It's hard to find a path to victory for them, to me, in my opinion, for them to find wins like that. And when you just see what Oklahoma City did in transition off of those turnovers, seeing how many easy buckets the Cavs just gave away for a team that, like, they played relatively okay in defense in the half court, I thought at times, but then you let Shea get going and you absolutely get cooked in transition. It's like, what are you gonna get? What is your chance of victory here? It's not super high when you have those 2 things: Garland's turnovers and amid a high number of turnovers overall, and the Thunder get out on the break. That's a recipe for an L. if you're the Cavs. Again, this performance was sloppy. It was careless in a lot of ways. It was not sharp. You should expect better of Garland. You should expect better of this team. And this is, again, the recipe of how Cleveland can lose games and not nearly play its best. So those are the stat of the night. Play of the night. I got 2 for you. This will be probably the most positive section of the show. Number 1, Donovan Mitchell in the first quarter threw one of my favorite passes I've ever seen him throw. He is attacking a Thunder defender. He crosses over once, doesn't beat his man. Tries it again against Jalen Williams, J-Dub, I believe, and can't get through. The Thunder defense is really keyed in on him. If you go back and watch this clip, all 5 Thunder defenders are like shading over towards him. They're just saying, okay, if you drive, there's going to be 2-3 bodies waiting for you. There's going to be bodies meeting you in the paint. So what does Mitchell do? He threads the needle between his defender and the help defender with his off left hand and finds Caris LeVert in the corner. Vert then 6 the 3, catch and shoot, swish, 3 points. Got the Cavs within 4 at that point of the game. Donovan Mitchell, I still think, is not always the best creator for others, but he does have this ability to make the really great reads to find shooters. It is his best passing attribute, is to find the shooters on the perimeter, know when to kick out, and use the gravity of what he's doing to draw in defenders, draw attention and space. On this play, he had 2 options. He really could have gone 2 different ways in this one. You have Max Strus above the break. He could have gone there. Josh Giddey helped aggressively off him into the paint. I mean, if you watch this, it's actually pretty crazy. Giddey is at the free throw line when he has other guys in help, and Max Strus, essentially the Cavs' best catch and shoot guy, is like just there. If Mitchell swung it there, if he had decided to go there, it's a harder pass, but if he gets it there, it's a wide open 3. But he sees Caris LeVert. He knows Caris LeVert is there on the back end. And when he knows he's drawing all these guys in, he can get it to him. Throws a beautiful, on-point, offhand pass to Caris LeVert, who sticks a 3. Beautiful passing for Mitchell. Those are the kind of looks he can generate, even if he's not he's not always, I think, the best passer, but he can, that kind of pass, that type of creation, he's absolutely great at. Second one, the Cavs have done a good job this year, I think, of using Max Strus in the short roll. In this game, they had a set in the third quarter. Max Strus comes off a pin down. They run a pick and roll with Mobley off of this, and Strus, in this situation, just throws Mobley a lot. The screen initially is Mobley, and Strus is just catching. He's curling into the paint, and he throws a lob to Mobley. That's just good offense. That is good use of Strus. He's a good passer. You can use him off a pin edge. You can use him in the short roll. And it's a good use of Mobley in this case. You had all this momentum. You created momentum for him rolling downhill with Chet defending Jared Allen. Shea ends up defending Mobley. You attack the situation there that worked. The Thunder were trying at different points to just have Shea on a weaker defender, in this case, or a weaker offensive player. In this case, it was Mobley. You took advantage of that. Not a super complex play, but you got Strus coming off a screen. Mobley rolls. It's dynamic. It's aggressive. It's to the point. Easy 2 points. You'd like to see more of that, and it gives Mobley some offensive utility. And again, Mitchell is on the back end as a spacer. Garland sets it up. Allen to the dunker spot. You have options if that first action is stopped. So I like that look. All right, coming up next, going to talk about Mobley a little bit more, him versus Chet, and where that kind of stands and how we should view that going forward. And also talk about missing Isaac Okoro. That is coming up next on Locked On Cavs. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And score early this NFL season with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. So that is $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and the official sportsbook of Locked On. So, thinking about Chet and Mobley here as we wrap up today's Locked On Cavs, I think number one, the obvious is it's going to be fascinating to compare and contrast them over time. They are a year apart. I know Chet's a rookie and Mobley's year 3, but Chet missed a year. They came in the draft year after each other. They both are good at different things. They're both kind of skinny, which is a real part of, there's a lot of bigs like that right now. There seems like we're getting skinnier bigs and less bulky guys at times, more mobile guys. It's where the game's at. But they're so different if you watch them. Like, yes, they're both skinny and tall and heralded and all this stuff, but they're very different. And I think if there's something that I'm curious to see how Mobley compares versus Chet is that Chet already has easy buttons on offense. He can shoot threes. He only took one in this game, but he made it. I think his handle's a little bit better. He has just a little bit more of a clear offensive role. Even if I think Mobley has a higher defensive ceiling, and I would take Mobley long term just because I think we've seen some really outstanding things from him in my defense. There's just no denying that there's something about Chet's offensive utility at his size and what he can do in that team that Mobley doesn't offer right now. Brian Windhorst, the GOAT himself, was on ESPN Cleveland this week talking about how Mobley has been disappointing on offense. I think that's overall true. I think there's still some positives game over game. He had a really nice drive through Chet's chest in this game, for instance. But you look at these guys, they're different, as similar as their body types are in a lot of ways. There are some real differences here. And I look at Chet and I think there's so much power in having that kind of offensive utility. And you can look at the numbers, you can look at the film. He and Giddey already have like a magical pick and roll and pick and pop connection, and the pick and pop stuff really unlocks a lot for OKC. And when we think about Mobley and we think about his offensive game, that's kind of where the shot comes in. We've seen him, he took a 3 in this game, didn't make it. He's had the corner 3 this year, but it doesn't feel like the shot is there. And I think when I look at Chet, I understand what he's going to have as a baseline as an offensive player. I understand kind of what that guy is going to be. I understand the buttons you can hit that'll just generate good looks with him and how you can craft stuff around him. I don't think we know what that is with Mobley yet. And if we're comparing them, and I think it's right to, that to me is probably the big differentiator on the offensive side of the ball. And if you're Mobley, and if you're the Cavs, I think figuring out what his pure offensive utility is going to be on a really good team, which he absolutely can contribute to because of his defensive ability and how good he is, and what I think they believe the ceiling is for him, and what I think the ceiling could be for him, I think that is a real thing to figure out. That is one of the journeys of the season, and I think watching him versus Chet puts him, for me, you could tell me I'm wrong, you could tell me being a hater, whatever it is. Go off. Don't care. Have your opinions. That's the beauty of this. I think Chet has easy buttons that Mobley doesn't have now, and I want to see if Mobley over time, and this year in particular, can add those. Lastly, Isaac Okoro misses a second straight game with a knee issue. They just straight up missed that guy. They straight up could use him in these moments. They straight up could use him as a defender. Coming into the year, he was one of the bigger question marks on this team. He was absolutely one of the real concerns that you had. I think you looked at this situation and looked at this roster and thought, okay, is he going to compete with Dean Wade? Is George Niang and Max Strusser here? Those guys are just going to get minutes, and you see what they provide. And I'm not saying Isaac Okoro is like an all-star now. I'm not saying Isaac Okoro is like suddenly one of the greatest players that the Cavs have now. I'm not really saying that. There's a reason he doesn't have a contract extension. But he's shooting 40% from 3 this year. He's playing really dynamic basketball. He's your best on-ball defender. He attacks. He started some games for you pretty effectively. He's competitive as all heck. I trust that guy to show up, and you need him from a size perspective. He is one of the few guys you have on the perimeter, and I count Strus in this as well, even though he's still a little bit smaller and not quite a lockdown guy. And not that Okoro is like all NBA lockdown guy, but like it's a very good rugged defender. You can throw at a lot of different guys. You need competitive size and guys who are strong enough to bang on the outside and defend guys like Shea, guys like Giddey. You need guys like Okoro on your roster. He was, to me, before the 2-game absence, and we'll see when he comes back. He did participate in practice before this road trip. Was the bright spot of the early season. I thought how he came out has been so impressive, has been so important to what has worked for the Cavs so far this year. And they have missed in the last 2 games. 2 different opponents, 2 different styles of basketball they went up against. But they have missed Okoro. I don't think there's any way around it. And the sooner you could get him back, I think inserting him back into the rotation is going to be a boon. I trust him more than Niang at this point. I trust him more than basically anyone but your 5 starters. And LeVert probably. I think he's right there as one of your top 7. Certainly you might like to improve on that spot long term, and we'll certainly see he has to keep it up. But this has to be sustained. That quality of play needs to be sustained. It's late. Continued and proven to be real. It has to be sustained. But Okoro is in a position where he's looked great. He's looked good. There's a character about him that is really useful. He has the strength that you need. He has a real niche skill set within this team. It's kind of clear they miss Isaac Okoro when he's not available. Who would have thought? All right, that's going to be it for today's Locked On Cavs. Coming up tomorrow, I'm going to do a 2-parter looking at a bunch of key stats for this Cavs team. Shooting, player stats, all kinds of stuff. We're going to do a whole 2-parter, me riffing on some numbers and what they mean or what they don't mean at this point in the season. Thanks to Jake Stevens as always. Back at you tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Please subscribe, rate, review, 5 stars only if you've not already.